The pipes burst on a Tuesday night in February, when the temperature outside had dropped to -28, and my wife was somewhere over the Atlantic, halfway through her flight to Halifax to visit her sister. I remember standing in the kitchen at 10:30, listening to the sound of water I couldn't explain, a soft, persistent dripping that seemed to come from below the floor. I told myself it was the wind. I told myself old houses make sounds in the cold. Our home in Oakwood Heights, a 2-story brick house we'd bought back in 1991, the year our youngest started kindergarten, had always had its quirks. 33 years of settling into the earth beneath it. I figured that was all it was. I was wrong. My name is Walter Beaumont. I'm 64 years old, retired from the post office after 31 years, and I thought I knew every corner of that house the way I knew the back of my own hand. The creaky third step on the staircase, the window in the master bedroom that rattled when the wind came from the northwest, the cold spot near the back of the garage that never quite warmed up even in July. I knew all of it, or so I believed. My wife, Patricia, had left that Sunday morning. Her sister Donna had recently come through hip surgery in Halifax, and Patricia had been planning the trip for weeks. She would be gone 11 days. I'd driven her to the airport myself, helped her check her luggage, kissed her goodbye at the security line. She'd squeezed my hand and said, "Don't let the house fall apart while I'm gone." We'd both laughed. I wasn't laughing on Tuesday night. The dripping sound got worse around 11. By the time I'd traced it to the utility room off the basement stairs, there was a thin stream of water running along the base of the south wall and pooling near the floor drain. A pipe somewhere in that wall had cracked, likely the cold snap. We'd had a warm January and the ground hadn't frozen as deep as usual. Then February hit like a hammer, and everything contracted at once. The plumber I called the next morning, a fellow named Greg, who ran a one-man operation out of Mississauga and had fixed things for us twice before confirmed it when I described the situation. "Sounds like your supply line to the utility sink," Greg said over the phone. "I can be there by 9. He arrived at 5 past, tools in a canvas bag over his shoulder, breath misting in the cold air when I opened the front door. I showed him down to the basement, pointed him toward the utility room, and went upstairs to make coffee. That's the kind of trust you build with someone over years of small repairs. You let them work, you stay out of the way. I was on my second cup when my phone buzzed on the kitchen table. I assumed it was Patricia checking in. She'd texted the night before from Halifax to say she'd arrived safely, and I'd expected she'd send another message in the morning once she was settled. But it wasn't Patricia. It was Greg. The message read, "Mr. Beaumont, I need you to come downstairs. There's something you need to see. I'd rather not explain by text." I set my coffee down. Something about the way he'd written it, not asking, not explaining, just summoning me quietly, made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. Greg was not a dramatic man. In all the years he'd come to the house, I'd never heard him raise his voice. He was the type who fixed things and invoiced you and said goodbye at the door with a firm handshake. A man of very few unnecessary words. I walked to the basement stairs. He was standing at the far end of the utility room when I came in, near the large metal shelving unit Patricia had installed along the south wall years ago. She'd organized it herself, paint cans, old holiday decorations, spare light bulbs, boxes of things we never quite got around to throwing out. I hadn't paid much attention to that shelving unit in years. It was just there, the way furniture becomes invisible when it's been in the same spot long enough. Greg had pulled it away from the wall, not far, maybe 18 inches, but enough to reveal what was behind it. A door. Not a finished door, not one with a frame and a handle you'd expect in a home. This was a heavy wooden door, raw and thick, set directly into the concrete block of the foundation wall. It had 3 deadbolt locks, each with a separate keyhole, and a fourth, a heavy sliding bolt, mounted at the top. All 4 were locked. A thin strip of weather stripping ran around the entire frame, the kind you use to seal a door against drafts, or against sound. I stared at it for what felt like a very long time. I moved the shelf to check if the pipe ran behind it, Greg said quietly. "The leak source is back there." But when I moved it, I saw the door. He paused. "Mr. Beaumont, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be straight with me." I looked at him. "Did you know this door was here?" "No," I said. My voice didn't sound like my own voice. "I knocked on it," he said. "About 5 minutes ago, before I texted you, I waited. Someone knocked back. The room seemed to tilt. I put my hand on the shelving unit to steady myself. "What do you mean someone knocked back?" "3 knocks," Greg said. He held up 3 fingers. Slow, like they were being careful about it. He looked at the door. "There's someone on the other side of that." I don't know how long I stood there. Time does a strange thing in moments like that. It doesn't stop exactly, but it loses its shape. I was aware of the sound of the water still dripping somewhere in the wall. I was aware of the cold of the basement floor coming up through my socks, because I'd come downstairs without putting on shoes. I was aware of the 4 locks on that door, and the fact that I had never in 33 years of living in this house seen it before. I called the police at 9:47 inches the morning. The dispatcher asked me to stay on the line. She asked if I believed there was immediate danger. I told her I didn't know. I told her there was a locked door in my basement that I'd never seen before, and that someone appeared to be inside it, and that I needed someone to come to my house right now. 2 officers arrived within 12 minutes. A third followed shortly after. Greg waited on the front porch, which I appreciated he understood without being asked that this was no longer a plumbing call. The officers went down to the basement. I went with them. One of them, a young woman with a calm, steady way of moving, examined the locks and the door frame, while her partner ran his hand along the weather stripping. They called for someone with a bolt cutter. While we waited, the older of the 2 officers knocked on the door 4 times and said clearly, "This is Peel Regional Police. If someone is in there, knock twice if you can hear me." 2 knocks, slow, careful. The officer looked at me. I looked at the floor. When they got the door open, what they found inside was a room approximately 9 feet by 11 feet. It had been finished drywall, a plywood floor, a single bulb on a timer mounted to the ceiling. There was a cot along one wall with 2 folded blankets, a plastic storage bin in the corner being used as a toilet, a small electric space heater, a battery-powered lantern, a shelf with several bottles of water, and a row of tinned food beans, soup, sardines, and a manual can opener. A second shelf held 3 paperback novels and a worn deck of playing cards. And sitting on the edge of the cot, blinking in the sudden light, was a man. He was thin. Extremely thin in the way that happens when a body is living on too little for too long. His hair had grown past his collar. His beard was untrimmed and streaked through with gray that hadn't been there before. His hands, resting on his knees, were trembling, but I knew him, even like that. Even after everything, I knew him the moment I saw him. It was my brother-in-law. Raymond, Patricia's younger brother, the man we had mourned as dead for 3 years and 4 months. I need to back up. I need to explain Raymond, because without understanding who he was to this family, none of what happened makes any kind of sense. Raymond Chisholm was 57 years old at the time we found him, though he looked older when they brought him out of that room. He was Patricia's only sibling, 8 years younger than her, and they had always had a complicated relationship. Complicated in the way that certain family bonds are tangled up with old grievances and shared history and a kind of fierce, exhausting love that neither of them was particularly good at expressing directly. Raymond had never married. He'd worked most of his adult life in property management, handling rentals, managing maintenance contracts for a small portfolio of commercial spaces in the Brampton area. He was good at it, organized, reliable, the kind of man who kept meticulous records and remembered details. He had a small apartment in Brampton and a circle of friends he'd had since college, and a routine he seemed to find genuinely satisfying. He also had money. Not a great fortune, but a significant one by the standards of someone who'd lived carefully and invested steadily over 30 years. A TFSA that had grown considerably, a paid-off RRSP, and, most relevantly, a life insurance policy with a named beneficiary. That beneficiary was Patricia. Raymond had named her when he'd taken out the policy in his 40s, back when she was the only family he had left after their parents passed. He'd never updated it. Why would he? They were close enough, in their way. He trusted her. In October of 2022, Raymond disappeared. There was no dramatic last sighting, no argument, no known reason for him to vanish. He simply stopped answering his phone. His friends couldn't reach him. His landlord reported him missing when the rent went unpaid for 2 months. Police investigated. There was no evidence of foul play at his apartment, no unusual withdrawals from his bank accounts, no indication of where he'd gone. He was a middle-aged man who had, as far as anyone could determine, simply walked out of his life one day and didn't come back. The investigation went on for several months. Then it wound down, the way these things do when there are no leads, and no body, and no clear crime. Raymond was officially listed as a missing person. In February of 2023, a set of remains was found in a wooded area near the Niagara Escarpment. They were badly decomposed. The identification process was lengthy. DNA testing was conducted. The results came back as inconclusive initially. Then, according to the official report Patricia showed me confirmed as a match for Raymond's profile, within a probability range they described as extremely high. Patricia wept for 3 days. I held her through most of it. I arranged the memorial service. I sat beside her at the front of the church and watched the casket empty, because there was nothing recovered suitable for burial, and I put my arm around her shoulders, and I told her we would get through this. I believed every word of it. Raymond had been in my basement the entire time. What the police pieced together over the following weeks, and what came out in full during the trial, was this. Patricia had planned it carefully. That was the word the Crown prosecutor used, over and over. Carefully. Not impulsively, not in a moment of crisis. Carefully, over a period of months, with the specific intention of collecting Raymond's life insurance payout, while eliminating him as a living person. The room behind the shelving unit had originally been a cold storage space built into the foundation when the house was first constructed in the late 1960s. Patricia had discovered it years before I knew about it. She was the one who handled most of the basement organization, the storage, the seasonal rotations of what went where. She'd never mentioned it to me. When I asked her once, years ago, why the south wall of the utility room seemed shorter than it should be based on the exterior dimensions of the house, she'd said something vague about the original builders and odd angles. I hadn't pushed it. I should have pushed it. She had the room prepared before Raymond disappeared. The reinforced door was installed by a contractor she'd found through a listing website, someone from out of province who had no connection to our neighborhood, paid in cash. The deadbolts were installed separately, one at a time, over several months, to avoid drawing attention. The weather stripping was her own work. She lured Raymond to the house on a pretext in October 2022, a story about needing help with some documents related to their late mother's estate, something that required his physical signature on paperwork. It was the kind of small administrative task he would have helped with without question. He came over on a Thursday afternoon when I was at my monthly card game. By the time I came home, Raymond was gone, and Patricia was making dinner, and everything was perfectly, quietly normal. The false identification was the part that required the most explanation. It came out during the investigation that Patricia had, some months before Raymond's disappearance, obtained a DNA sample from him, a used coffee cup taken from his apartment during a visit, and had used a contact she'd cultivated through a property management acquaintance to arrange for a fraudulent laboratory result to be submitted alongside the actual remains found near the escarpment. The remains were those of an unidentified man who had died of exposure, whose case had gone unsolved. Patricia had obtained information about this case through channels that the investigation was still working to fully trace. The life insurance company paid out $437,000 in March of 2023. Patricia had been depositing Raymond's food and water through a small external hatch on the north foundation wall, one I'd never noticed, because it was on the side of the house that faced the old cedar hedge, overgrown and rarely examined. She had installed a lock on the hatch that matched nothing in my keychain. The hatch was barely large enough to pass a grocery bag through. She had been doing this, on average, every 4 to 5 days, adjusting the schedule around my habits and routines so that I would never see her. Raymond told the police that he had spent the first several months planning ways to escape. He'd tried to work at the hinge pins of the door. He'd cataloged every object in the room for potential use. But the door had been hung with that specific vulnerability in mind. The hinges were on the inside, but reinforced in a way that made the pins irrelevant. The locks were high quality. The room had no weak points he could find. Over time, and this was the part of his testimony that stays with me the most over time, he said, he had simply tried to survive. He'd read the paperback novels until he had them memorized. He'd played solitaire. He'd done whatever physical movement he could in the limited space. He'd talked to himself. He'd held on to the belief, as rationally as he could manage, that something would eventually go wrong in whatever plan his sister had made, that a crack would appear, that someone would come. He'd been right about that. It just took 3 years and 4 months and a burst pipe and a February cold snap. I called Patricia that afternoon. I'm not sure why. Exactly, the police didn't ask me to. And in hindsight, there was no practical reason to do it myself. I think I needed to hear her voice. I think some part of me was still hoping there was an explanation that would make the world make sense again. She picked up on the second ring. "Walter," she said warmly, "I was just about to call you. Donna had her follow-up appointment this morning. It went really well. How are things there?" I didn't say anything for a moment. "Walter, is everything all right? You sound strange." "I found the door," I said. The silence that followed was 3 seconds long. I counted, afterward, when I was trying to reconstruct the conversation. 3 seconds is not very long in ordinary life. In those 3 seconds, I watched 33 years of marriage rearrange itself into something I didn't recognize. "I don't know what you mean," she said. Her voice was steady. That was the part that undid me completely. Not guilt, not panic, just steady. "Raymond is alive," I said. "The police are here. He's alive." She hung up. She was arrested at Halifax Stanfield International Airport at 6:15 that evening, attempting to board a connecting flight to Dublin on a passport I had not known she possessed. The trial lasted 11 weeks. It was covered extensively in the local press and picked up by several national outlets. The Crown laid 6 charges, including forcible confinement, fraud over $5,000, obstruction of justice, and 1 charge relating to the manipulation of official identification records that I won't attempt to describe in precise legal terms, because I am not a lawyer and I barely understood it myself as it was explained to me. She was convicted on all counts. The sentencing judge, in her remarks, described the case as one of the most calculated acts of cruelty against a family member she had encountered in 30 years on the bench. She noted that the harm done to Raymond was not only physical, though the physical effects alone, the malnourishment, the muscle atrophy, the impact on his vision from prolonged, low-light conditions, were severe and would require years of rehabilitation, but psychological in a way that could not be fully quantified. She also noted the harm done to me, which I had not expected her to mention. She described it as the destruction of a person's ability to trust their own perception of reality. She said those words, and I sat in the second row of that courtroom and felt them land somewhere deep and accurate. Patricia received 14 years. Her lawyer is appealing. I have no opinion about that process that I'm willing to put into words. Raymond has been in a rehabilitation facility in Hamilton for the past 8 months. He is making progress. The physical recovery has gone better than the medical team initially projected. He is a stubborn man, which was always one of the things about him that drove Patricia to impatience, and which I now think of as the quality that kept him alive. The psychological work is slower, more uneven. He has good weeks and hard weeks. He is learning, at 57 years old, how to sleep in a room with an unlocked door without waking up every 40 minutes. These are things a person should not have to learn. I visit him on Thursday afternoons. We play cards sometimes. Sometimes we just sit. He doesn't talk about the room very often, and I've learned not to ask. When he does bring it up, usually obliquely, usually while looking at something else, I try to simply listen. I was not trained for any of this. I am figuring it out as I go, the same way he is. The house in Oakwood Heights sold in September. I couldn't stay there. I understood that clearly the day the police sealed the basement as a crime scene, and I stood in my own kitchen and could not make myself walk back down the stairs. I stayed with my son and his family in Burlington for 3 months while the sale went through, and I'm now in a smaller place in Waterdown, a rental, a ground floor unit with no basement at all. I chose that deliberately. Greg, the plumber, still sends me a card at Christmas. The first one arrived 2 months after everything happened, a plain card, nothing dramatic written inside, just his name signed at the bottom and a single line. "I'm glad I moved the shelf." I have that card in a drawer in my new kitchen. I take it out sometimes. I've had a long time to think about what I should have known, and when, and why I didn't let myself know it. There were things I noticed over the years that I pushed aside. The way Patricia would sometimes offer to handle things in the basement so I didn't have to bother. The occasional evening when she'd be downstairs for longer than seemed necessary, and would come back up looking slightly flushed, slightly alert, and I'd ask if everything was all right, and she'd say she'd just been reorganizing. The one time, and I remember this so clearly now that it's almost unbearable, when I went downstairs unexpectedly in the middle of the afternoon and heard her on the other side of the utility room door say, very quickly and quietly, something that I couldn't make out. When I opened the door, she was alone, and she said she'd been talking to herself. And I laughed and said that was a sign of getting old. And she laughed too, and we went upstairs together and had dinner. I have gone over that moment 10,000 times. I don't know what she was saying. I will probably never know. But I know now that I heard something that didn't fit, and I decided, without even really deciding, to let it fit anyway. Because it was easier. Because she was my wife. Because the house was warm and dinner was ready, and I was 61 years old, and I had no frame of reference for what was actually happening 6 feet away from where I was standing. Trust is not a passive thing. I believed for a long time that trusting the people you love meant not questioning them, not looking too hard, not pressing on the things that didn't quite add up. I understand now that this is not trust. It is a kind of comfortable blindness that we dress up as loyalty, because the alternative, really paying attention, really asking the hard questions, is frightening. It means accepting that the people we love most are also capable of things we cannot predict or control. I am not saying this to excuse myself. I am saying it because I think it is true, and because I think it is one of the few useful things to come out of everything that happened. The understanding that paying attention is an act of love, not a form of suspicion. That asking questions is not the same thing as distrust. That if something doesn't add up, the kindest thing you can do for yourself, for the people around you, is to say so out loud instead of going upstairs and having dinner. Raymond would have wanted someone to say so out loud 3 years and 4 months earlier. He never said this to me directly. He would not, because he is a private man who does not believe in making other people feel worse than they already do. But I know it is true, and I carry it with me every day into whatever is left of the life I'm rebuilding in this ground floor apartment in Waterdown, with no basement, and a door I leave unlocked every single night. If you are reading this and there is something in your life that doesn't add up, a question you've been avoiding, a detail you keep deciding not to examine, please don't do what I did. Please don't wait for a burst pipe and a plumber and a February cold snap to make the decision for you. Sometimes the most dangerous place to be is comfortable, and sometimes the bravest thing a person can do is simply move the shelf.